Don't sue me, bro. Hello everybody and welcome back to a brand new episode of Business Blaze. My name is Simon. Danny writes our scripts, I go through them, I make some fun, and we see how it goes. This one is the huge companies that came back from the dead. 4 massive companies, the ones went bankrupt. Sometimes Danny gives us an alternate title, because I guess he doesn't like the one I came up with. But here we are. Let's carry on. I can still remember how gutted I felt when the news broke in 2007 that international toy company Toys R Us had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. I don't know if I remember when this happened, and I assume Danny spent a bunch of time as a kid in a Toys R Us. I don't know if gutted would feel how I felt when Toys R Us went bankrupt. If I was a kid and it went bankrupt, I'd be like, holy this is the end of my world. But now as an adult, 1, I'm an adult, I don't buy toys, and 2, I'm not gonna go to Toys R Us with my kids. It's Amazon. That's what Amazon is for. And I imagine that's why Toys R Us went bankrupt. It's cheaper, it's more convenient, it's better. We've got used to seeing many of the biggest retail stores disappear from the high street over the last couple of decades, but this one really tugged at my heartstrings. I've got so many vivid memories of childhood quality time spent in Toys R Us, trying to figure out if I was gonna spend my saved up paper round money on Masters of the Universe Castle Grayskull playset, and the Ghostbusters Slime Buster. I think I actually remember that one. Big selling point, it shoots real slime. Is there such a thing as fake slime? Or the Knight Rider Super Stunt Set. I recently went to a YouTube thing, or a few months ago. I had no idea how huge the slime thing was on YouTube. There were a bunch of people there. It's like, what do? I make slime videos. It's like, holy you got 100 million views a month. What the I had 2 paper rounds, by the way. I worked hard for this crazy and I only got 1 day off a year. Bloody hell, Danny. Now I feel bad. That's intense. When I first heard that Toys R Us had gone under, I couldn't help feeling as if a piece of my own history had been lost forever. Admittedly, I hadn't actually walked into a Toys R Us store for well over 20 years, and if I ever do have a midlife crisis and start stocking up on new toys again, I'd probably find it better, easier, and cheaper to buy them online. Also, what sort of man has a midlife crisis which involves buying loads of toys? Isn't a midlife crisis all about buying a Porsche? Also, when is midlife? When can I get a Porsche? So the impact of this bankruptcy on my personal life is close to 0. Still, it's natural to feel a bit sad when something that's been there your whole life suddenly disappears from the landscape. Oh, now I feel like an unfeeling bastard. But the good news is that Toys R Us isn't dead. They're just resting. It was very recently announced that the brand has emerged from bankruptcy under the new name of True Kids. TRU Kids. Can't we just use the E? Is that cool? Should we also start spelling the kids with a Z on the end? Do we really need this? Maybe, by not having the E, they save some money on all that signage, and it'll save them from bankruptcy. They've just opened their first new store in the United States. The name may have changed, but the legend lives on. I don't exactly understand how the legend lives on. The company went bankrupt, and then they changed their name. Isn't this just a new company? I don't know how this works. It's interesting to discover just how many more of today's corporations, that's a completely legitimate term, are in fact reanimated corpses. Businesses that once went bust to rise like a phoenix from the ashes. Here are some of the more surprising names. First up, Kodak. In this first case, it's not perhaps so surprising that Kodak bit the dust. It was a company built on the idea of selling and processing your photographic film and transforming it into a nice package of printed photographs, a concept which inevitably became redundant with the advent of digital cameras and smartphones. What's more surprising is how Kodak became the architect of their own downfall, missed several opportunities to adapt to a new market that they helped to create, and yet still somehow bounced back from oblivion, albeit on a much smaller scale. I'm old enough to remember the days, Danny is, when it took ages to finally get your hands on your holiday snaps. Oh, I also remember that. You could do 1 hour, but it was twice the price. And then it would, bloody hell, I live in a city and a tractor just drove past my window. Yeah, it was really expensive to do it faster, so generally I'll just wait. I'd pick the longest one possible. You'd pop into your local photo processing store, you'd hand over a wad of cash and then wait days for your films to be developed. I'm pretty sure I posted them off. I think there was a service which you put them in a big envelope, you sent them off, and then it came back and you'd tick on the back what you wanted done with them, and you might even put a check in with the films. Quite often you'd find, God, that was such a massive hassle. How much better is it today? Also, video as well. This would be impossible. Although digital cameras, I feel they were around. Digital video cameras are around, right? They just sucked. Quite often you'd find that you're just wasting a small fortune on stacks of photographs of your own thumb, but that was all part of the thrilling risk. Living on the edge there, Danny. But then Kodak was very much dominant in the industry. During their heyday, they sold 85% of cameras and 90% of all film in the United States. That's pretty incredible. I mean, I think I definitely used Kodak, or what was the other one, like Fujifilm? Or there was definitely cheaper versions as well, which I probably used. They actually never made that much money from the cameras themselves. The idea was to sell the equipment quite cheaply and then charge you a fortune for the films and processing, not a million miles away from the printer ink cartridges business model, or the razor and blades. If this was sponsored by Dollar Shave Club, I'd mention them here, but it's not, so you didn't have to sit through an ad. Yay! I did recently get a printer that has continuous ink built into it. So you just pour these, it's a Canon printer, you just pour these giant bottles of Canon ink into it and you can print. It's great. It's a big A3 thing. I print a load of photos. It's cool. And you don't have to pay for inks, which are insane, or you have to pay a tiny amount for inks, which are usually insanely expensive. A marketing phrase, a Kodak moment, evolved into a commonly used term to describe any personal life event or special moment that was worthy of preserving on a photograph. For example, your baby has just been sick all over my favorite shirt. This is such a Kodak moment. Sadly, it's now evolving into a commonly used description of a complacent business that stubbornly refuses to shift with the times. Yeah, it's like a Kodak moment. You had a great business, you didn't evolve at all, and then you went bankrupt and lost like a legacy of, 100 years? What a Kodak moment. That's possibly a little brutal, as we should all remember that Kodak, or the Eastman Kodak Company, if we're being formal, employed over a century of success before entering into a negative period. The American company was first established in 1888, but began to feel the pressure in the 1990s. That's a pretty solid 100-year run, when new digital cameras first threatened to render Kodak obsolete. Also, can you imagine being like the CEO, the chairman of that company at that time, where it's like it's going out of business? It's a 100-year company that you have failed. No, or like, that's failing. No pressure, guy. Digital cameras were threatening to render the company obsolete. And which of these pesky competitors first came up with a digital camera? Well, that would actually be Kodak. I'm not sure, did we make a video about this very subject? Because if we didn't, it was one of the unaired videos. Like when I start a new channel, there's a whole bunch of videos that don't actually make it onto the channel, kind of like test run pilot ones. I feel this was really early on, or you guys never saw that one. Maybe I'll release it someday, probably not. They tend to be a bit. One of their engineers, Steve Sasson, presented the company with a prototype of the world's first digital camera as early as 1976, although it was absolutely massive and took forever to take a low-quality image and had to be clumsily connected to a TV to view the results. Yeah, I can imagine just being the guy on the Kodak board, though, and see it's like, hey, Steve, what do you offer us? Gentlemen, I present to you the digital camera, and he's just like wheeling in like a wheelbarrow and it's just loaded up and he's like, and how do we see it, Steve? Well, let's connect it to this giant TV. And by giant, I don't mean like the screen was giant, I mean like, big old CRT beast. Kodak realized that the new technology could kill their own market in film, so they quietly brushed it under the carpet and pretended it never happened. But Kodak, bad news, you're not the only guys who came up with this. By the 1990s, Kodak could no longer hide from the emerging digital technology, and the company gave itself 10 years to adapt to digital or die. Yet their 10-year mission seemed half-hearted at best, as they seemed determined to keep one foot stubbornly in photographic prints. Also, 10 years in technology. Like, can you imagine the difference between technology in 2010 and today, 2020, is insane. The idea that Kodak's like, yeah, we're gonna go digital. Great, because we need to be there by summer. No. We'll get there by about 2030. Don't worry, it'll be fine. Kodak invested $500 million into developing their Advantix preview film camera. I know something about this. I think we made a video about it, or I read about it somewhere. The Advantix film camera, which was still technically a digital camera and allowed users to preview their shots, but the images were still only saved to film, and you still needed to pay for the printing costs. Yeah, the problem with this camera, it's kind of like half digital, half film. Maybe Danny will get into this anyway. It's half digital, half film. So you take a picture, and it's not like you really actually get to preview it, because it's still put onto the negative. What you do is you take the picture, it gets put onto the negative, then it shows you a little digital preview, and you can choose whether you want that negative to be printed. So if you've got a roll of like 36, it still uses one of those 36. The only thing is, you say to the person who's printing it, yeah, don't do number 24 because, Peter is not smiling or whatever in it. So all in all, it's kind of It was an expensive bit of kit when it first launched in 1996, but proved to be a complete flop. Most potential customers felt that if they were shelling out that much money for a digital camera, they wanted a digital camera. Yeah, like something that actually, you didn't have to go and process the film afterwards. Kodak took what seemed to be a forward-thinking move in 2001 when they acquired the photo sharing website a photo years before Facebook and Instagram took over the world with the same concept. Yeah, and guess which ones of those worked? But instead of embracing the future, Kodak just turned the whole venture into another lame excuse to try and flog more photographic prints, and failed to drum up much interest. They eventually sold the failed platform years later, in exactly the same month that Facebook acquired Instagram for $1 billion. I remember when that Facebook acquisition went through for $1 billion, and it was like, oh my god, that's a lot of money. And then they bought WhatsApp for $19 billion. Oh my god, Instagram was a steal. And now that Calm.com website, Calm.com, the meditation one, they just got like 88 million in funding, worth $1 billion. I am in the wrong business. Although Kodak claimed to be trying to adapt to the future, they seem to spend far more time on fiercely protecting their patent rights and entering into mostly ill-fated court battles with the likes of Apple and Samsung over alleged copyright infringements. As the company's share price plummeted, Kodak eventually filed for bankruptcy in January 2012. It's really quite astonishing that they did manage to hold on for so long. Like 2012, guys, and you were still wanting us to develop photos. Really? I think in the same, in that previous Business Blaze thing, if it went out or not, we talked about they tried releasing a phone. It was like a camera first and a phone second. I don't think it worked. However, after selling off those fiercely protected patents for around $525 million, that's not bad. Kodak emerged from bankruptcy in late 2012 and redefined itself as a much smaller company, providing printing and photographic services for commercial clients. So the guy who runs it was like, yeah, well, he didn't run it into the ground. It's just like, yeah, now we provide photographic services to, commercial clients rather than absolutely dominating the photo world. So. They could possibly have learned something from their arch rivals, Fujifilm. Yeah, I remember doing stuff with Fujifilm. Japanese company Fujifilm always played second fiddle to Kodak on the global stage, but had a shrewder response to the rise of digital technology. Whereas Kodak were busy engaging in court battles and flogging a dying concept to customers who'd moved on, Fujifilm developed new business lines and adapted their technology to cater for new markets, including medical imaging, business document solutions, and even cosmetics. Fujifilm makes cosmetics, the more you know. By daring to look beyond the inevitable demise of the photographic film industry, Fujifilm thankfully avoided having their own Kodak moments. Marvel. It's difficult to comprehend. Marvel went bankrupt? Don't Marvel make all those comic book movies that I haven't seen? It's difficult to comprehend. I swear, and so much stuff I watch on Netflix these days is like, they have the flicking comic book pages at the beginning, right? Like, I'm like, whoa, Netflix, you got another Marvel show, which I think is always like really well made and stuff, but then always turns out to be way too violent for my enjoyment. It's difficult to comprehend how one of the most successful and acclaimed publishers of American comic books over the last 80 years was once forced to file for bankruptcy at a relatively late stage of their story, especially when you consider how much money Marvel movies have been making on the silver screen in recent years. It's like, yeah, Marvel, unlike Kodak, things worked out okay for you. Like millions of other spotty teenagers, I grew up on Marvel comics and relished every vivid panel of amazing titles such as Doctor Strange, Thor, the Fantastic Four, as well as some of the lesser known and slightly weaker superhero strips such as Asbestos Lady. What the fuck? 3D Man, Aren't We All 3D, and Hindsight Lad. His special power was to look back at something and consider how it should have been done differently, not created a crisis. I don't know anything about comic books. I've read a few Iron Man comic books when I was younger because a friend of mine recommended me them, and they were pretty cool, but I've never read anything else, and Hindsight Lad can't be real, right? Like, that's pretty bad. To be honest, I grew out of them when I got a bit older and started spending all my money on super strength lager and White Lightning cider. These are like the cheapest alcohol that you can buy, like, as a teenager, like, you try your luck buying stuff. It's always like, yeah, I may as well buy the stuff that's strong and cheap. I also drank a fair bit of a super strength lager when I was a student, because it's the same price as the regular lager, but instead of 4%, it's 8%. But I've dipped into some of the recent films and found them to be fairly enjoyable fluff. I've never seen them. I think I saw one. I've seen Iron Man, because that was amazing. Anyway, let's carry on. It shouldn't be too surprising the Marvel's financial problems emerged just before they started raking in billions of dollars from making movies about grown men and women in very silly costumes. Ooh, we're gonna get some flack for that. Although they are silly, aren't they? Danny and I are on the same page. I feel like everyone else is on a different page with this stuff. As comic sales declined in the 1990s, Marvel found itself with a huge portfolio of popular characters that they didn't know what on earth to do with, whereas DC Comics had found success in cinemas with Superman and Batman franchises, both of which I've seen. I love those Dark Knight movies, I should have thought of those. Those were great. I didn't really enjoy the new Superman movies, but I liked the Superman TV show with Dean Cain. That was pretty great. Marvel decided to go with Howard the Duck, which turned out to be a box office disaster and is now widely regarded as one of the worst films ever made, although I kind of like it. I've never heard of it. Let's look it up. I mean, it wouldn't be Business Blaze if we didn't have a laugh at someone else's expense, would it? Howard the Duck. Oh man, I can see why people think this is bad. What is this? Who makes this shit? It's like that one from this year, Cats, or Sonic the Hedgehog. Why do we have to make it so creepy? He's got like these weird human eyes. What do you guys reckon? Box office. Not box office. How do I zoom out? Rotten Tomatoes, one of the worst films ever made. I'm not gonna go with 0, because 0 is such a rarity. I'm gonna say like 4%. Oh, it can't be one of the worst movies ever made. It gets 15% from the critics, 38% from the audience. Although Marvel did end up making some wiser choices towards the end of the 90s, with films based on Spider-Man, X-Men, and Blade. Oh wait, I love Spider-Man. Well, like Spider-Man. X-Men was pretty great, especially the original ones. Blade's cool. And they didn't end up making much money from them because they'd signed poor flat fee deals with the movie production companies. For example, Blade was a modest box office success, generating $70 million in the US alone, but Marvel walked away with just $25,000. Oh, Marvel. Come on, you could do better than that. After filing for bankruptcy in 1996 and laying off 275 employees, the company went through a period of reorganization and eventually emerged from bankruptcy in 1998 following a rescue merger with American toy company Toy Biz. I was just making fun of how they were going to call it like Kids Toys with a Z on the end, and they really have a company called Toy Biz. B-I-Z. And also, Danny, we did a whole video on Enron, and Danny was constantly ragging on Enron for having a name. And I'm like, really? Toy Biz? Kids Toys? Although I do have a channel called Top Tens, but I did not name it. Later in 2003, Marvel explored the idea of creating their own film production studio so they could keep all the profits from future film franchises instead of just pocketing the crumbs. Yeah, after that absolute Blade rape. Probably a good idea, boys. The problem was they were a bit strapped for cash and needed $525 million to secure a financing deal from Merrill Lynch to turn Marvel Studios into a reality. Wasn't that the exact amount that... Oh yeah, that was the exact amount Kodak sold its patents for. What a coincidence. They took a huge gamble by effectively putting their most valuable assets on the line, including the likes of the Avengers, Captain America, and Doctor Strange. I said I hadn't seen any of these movies, but I realized I've seen quite a lot of comic book movies. I was also in Captain America. I was an extra in the first Captain America movie. You can't actually see me in the final thing because I'm just in a big crowd of people. But I was a policeman. There you go. If the movie plans failed, then the bank would seize control of the rights to all of Marvel's popular characters and leave the company high and dry. Of course, time has shown that the high-risk strategy worked, and Marvel's blockbuster movies have become a staple of the 21st century, with Disney eventually acquiring Marvel in 2009 for $4 billion. Oh my god. Although, Disney buys Marvel, all of these movies for $4 billion. Facebook buys WhatsApp. It's like a messaging app for $19 billion. What? Can you imagine the WhatsApp guys in the acquisition mission? And it's like Facebook just slide an envelope across the desk. They're like, we think you'll find this offer very interesting. One of the WhatsApp guys, he's probably 26, opens it up, looks at it, he's like, I will consider your proposal. And then he's just like, fucking take it. So maybe we'll still get to see that eagerly anticipated Asbestos Lady movie. I can't wait. Hugo Boss even. Just a quick word about Hugo Boss is an example of a business that went under before it had barely even got going. I'm a little bit disappointed by Hugo Boss, actually. It's winter. I bought some gloves. I bought them from a department store. I didn't even realize they were Hugo Boss. Generally, I wouldn't waste my money on this stuff. And there's a hole in them. I've had them 2 weeks. I hope we're gonna rag on Hugo Boss because that was extremely disappointing. I've got a bottle of Hugo Boss Eau de Toilette spray in my bathroom cabinet, but I have to confess that the history of the company and the founder came as a complete shock to me. I had absolutely no idea. Wait, did these guys make the Nazi uniforms? Was it Hugo Boss? I'm now tempted to throw away the fragrance in disgust, but it costs nearly 30 quid and it's almost full, so I'll have to think about it. I'm also I don't really wear perfume, and I do have a bottle of Calvin Klein something or other that's been sitting on my bathroom shelf forever. It's this empty. this far from the top. I just don't go to places, I don't go anywhere fancy. I'm at work alone all day. The German clothing company Hugo Boss was founded in Metzingen in 1924, originally focusing on shirts, jackets, and work clothing. Nothing too fancy back in those days. However, Germany was going through a tough economic crisis following the end of the First World War, and this forced Hugo Boss into bankruptcy as early as 1931. The company was saved when Hugo managed to reach an agreement with his creditors, who left him nothing more than 6 sewing machines to try and rebuild his clothing business. How generous of them. I'd like to say the good old Hugo and his team did a great job in turning the business around, as the brand is still going strong today and has evolved into one of the world's leading fashion houses. But it all seems a bit irrelevant after I discovered the truth about the founder of the company and what happened next. I'm sure this is common knowledge to fans of either fashion or war. I mean, I feel like I did know that he had something to do with the Nazis, but I didn't think about it when I bought these gloves. I was just like, I need some gloves and these ones fit quite well. Hugo Boss was a member of the Nazi Party. He transformed the fortunes of his business by supplying uniforms to the Nazi armed forces and organizations, including the SS and the Hitler Youth. Now, one thing I will say about the SS is like, yeah, they're fucking horrible, but their uniforms did look pretty good. I've thought about getting... During the Second World War, Hugo Boss employed forced laborers and prisoners of war in his factories, many of whom were worked to death or sent off to Auschwitz to be killed. Oh, good. Following the war, Hugo himself was initially classified as an activist, although this was later downgraded to follower. Either way, he was stripped of his right to vote and his rights to run a business in 1946. He died just 2 years later. Well, good. It's always nice when a Nazi supporter dies. However, his business lived on under the guidance of his son-in-law, who steered the company in a new, non-Nazi direction of men's suits, and Hugo Boss eventually became the major global luxury fashion house that it is today. If I was his son-in-law, I'd be like, we should probably change the name, right? But shouldn't they at least change the name, though? Yes. Danny and I are on the same page. I can't help feeling that the bottle of Hugo Boss Eau de Toilette is now leaving a nasty fragrance in my bathroom cabinet. Ba-da-bum-bum! Maybe the creditors were being overly generous when they left him with as many as 6 sewing machines following that early bankruptcy. Incidentally, I got to get a quick poll on social media when I was writing this section to try and ascertain whether it was common knowledge that Hugo Boss was a Nazi. About half the respondents said yes and laughed in my face for asking such a dumb question. Welcome to the internet. While the other half said no, which indicates to me that the first half were completely wrong. General Motors. No. Apple. Alright. I was originally intending to talk about General Motors for the final entry in this script, but I had a change of heart. There wouldn't be anything too surprising to reveal here, as it's still a relatively recent story which developed into one of the biggest ever corporate bankruptcies in history. The short version of the story, for anyone who doesn't know it, is General Motors enjoys about 100 years of business success, goes bankrupt, is rescued by the US taxpayer to the tune of $50 billion. In 2009, goes on to make loads more mistakes and cock-ups, but everything turns out alright, because everyone still likes buying cars and trucks from General Motors. In the UK, there's a big bank, probably internationally as well, called RBS, and they were bailed out by the taxpayer in the 2008 financial crisis. A friend of mine worked at RBS, by the taxpayer, and we used to constantly make fun of him that he worked for us. A far more interesting story is the case of Apple, even though we're cheating a little bit, as the company was only teetering on the very brink of bankruptcy. It's reported that the tech giants were mere weeks away from bankruptcy in 1997, and the media were already compiling the obituaries for this once pioneering enterprise, which seemed to have lost its grip. So let's be very clear here, because I've got a rather unpleasant cease and desist letter from someone previously when I said, or the scriptwriter for it said that they were bankrupt when they weren't technically bankrupt. They were just out of money. Not bankrupt, very close to bankruptcy, or, teetering on the edge. Let's just say it like that. Don't sue me, bro. By the 1990s, Apple was getting deeper and deeper into trouble. Steve Jobs had long since left the building. The company was plowing money into failed or abandoned experiments, and Apple was rapidly losing its market share to arch nemesis Microsoft, who had been sensibly focusing on providing affordable software for everyday computers. Yeah, Apple's expensive. Apple's share price was plummeting and bankruptcy was looming. Not happening in 1997. At this point, Steve Jobs was welcomed back as CEO with open arms, and one of the first things he did was make a phone call and secure a $150 million investment, which saved Apple from oblivion. I know who this came from. The person on the other end of the line, was Bill Gates, and the company that rescued Apple was Microsoft. There are a few theories as to why Microsoft would bother to step in and save their biggest competitor. The first is that Bill Gates decided that business wasn't all about making money, and he was just overwhelmed by the desire to help those in need with financial support and love from the heart. Which would be funny if it was like 1997 or whatever, but it's like, isn't Bill Gates now the world's biggest philanthropist by like far? Other than governmental giving, obviously. So it's like, yeah, obviously Bill Gates does love giving money away, like all his money, and then getting loads of other people to give away all their money as well. The second is that Bill Gates recognized that his own company was raking in profits by flogging software to Mac users, and in fact, they were probably making more money from Mac users than Apple was at the time. He also saw how Microsoft could benefit from the new development opportunities connected to future innovative Apple products, opportunities which wouldn't exist if Apple was allowed to go under. Yeah, it's true, like, I still use Word and stuff. I don't anymore. I have to say I use Google Drive now. But for a long time, I used Microsoft products on an Apple machine. The third is that Microsoft was currently being sued by Apple, who were accusing Microsoft of copying their operating system. Oh yeah, that was a huge hoo-ha. It's been speculated that Microsoft would have lost a hell of a lot of them, more than a paltry $150 million, if the court case was allowed to reach its conclusion. But Apple agreed to drop the lawsuit as part of the rescue deal. We could possibly disregard the first theory, but the real reason is probably a combination of the latter too. When Steve Jobs announced the rescue deal on stage at the Macworld Boston conference in 1997 and introduced Bill Gates via a live satellite link, the face of the new savior of Apple was met widely with boos from the audience. Footage of this exists on YouTube if you think you might enjoy seeing Bill Gates squirm for a few moments. Normally we'd watch this and have a bit of a laugh, but this video is already really long, I think. Yes, so we're not going to do that. Seemingly a bit harsh though. Back in those days, Apple had a market cap of around $3 billion, which lagged way behind Microsoft's cap of around $620 billion. Oh my god, that's a huge difference. Thanks in part to Bill Gates' rescue deal, Apple very recently overtook Microsoft to become the world's first company to reach a market capitalization of $1 trillion, which is an insane amount of money. You'd think he would have at least deserved a couple of polite hand claps. The poor lamb. He's doing alright. Isn't he the world's richest man in the world? Or is him and Jeff always like one or the other? And Bill's like working on giving away all the money. Anyway, this has been Business Blaze. Thank you all for watching. I appreciate it. If you liked this video, like it. If you didn't like it, dislike it. Subscribe, notifications. That's it. We're done.